All right, in our last section, we talked about adding numbers, adding positive and negative numbers. In 1.6 now, we're going to talk about subtracting numbers, subtracting positive and negative numbers. Before we do that, let's talk about opposites, because this is going to help us with our subtraction. Numbers such as 6 and -6 are opposites of each other, or what we call additive inverses. So the opposite of 6 is -6, right? So for example, number 1, find the opposite of each number. So what's the opposite of positive 34? Well, negative 34, right? The opposite of negative 8.3 is positive 8.3. And the opposite of 0, well, is just 0, because 0 doesn't have either a positive or negative attached. So, looking at example number 2, it asks us to find the opposite of x, or the opposite of negative x, if x were 16. So for the first one, we want to find the opposite of 16. The opposite of 16 is -16, right? And the second part, it wants us to find the opposite of -16. So the opposite of -16 is positive 16. You might have noticed that when I have one negative, I get a negative answer, and when I have two negatives, I get a positive answer. You've probably heard before that two negatives make a positive, right? What we're really doing is we have a -1 and we're multiplying it by a -a. Two negatives make me a positive. Or the opposite of negative is a positive, however you'd like to think of it. Let's do another one. So what if I had this one, example number 3? I want the opposite of x if x is -3. Well, the opposite of -3 is positive 3. So the next one's kind of tricky. This one says we want the opposite of -3. Woo! So the opposite of -3 inside here is positive 3. And now what's the opposite of positive 3? -3. Whew, that's kind of confusing, right? All right, make sure that you practice those opposites or additive inverses, because we're going to use that idea to help us with subtracting positive and negative numbers.